You're watching Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. Our country is facing so many crises, from racial injustice to global pandemic. It's really hard to imagine that we're already in the midst of a climate catastrophe in the making, already in progress. But that's why, we need to remain vigilant and alert and aware of what's going on. So the Trump administration is currently using this moment while the country's attention is diverted to chip away at states' rights to make key decisions that impact climate through a new Clean Water Act rule. Our regular climate guest, Alexander Kaufman, is back on the program to talk about what this means. His recent piece, EPA mounts a new strike on states' rights, this time to boost pipeline companies. It came out earlier, and we're happy that you're here to talk with us. Alexander is a writer on climate for HuffPost. Alexander, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oy.
Oy, indeed.
Last week we were celebrating that the Williams pipeline got ixnayed nixed by President Cuomo. Did I just have a Freudian view into the future slip? Governor Cuomo for now until the states fall apart. Anyway, what does the new rule that Trump is trying to push forward? What does it do, and why are climate activists concerned about it?
So what this rule does is it changes the way that Section 401 of the Clean Water Act is interpreted, making it so that there are more narrow definitions in there, and making it so that the administration can prevent states like New York from using that part of the law, which allows for water quality permitting, to hold up or eventually block pipeline projects like the Williams pipeline in New York. This would also be applicable, for example, to the coal terminal that Jay Inslee rejected in Washington State last year. And so what this essentially does is it sets stricter deadlines by which the state has to make decisions on permitting, and it narrows the definition of what water quality means. So, for example, a state could not consider the effects that an oil pipeline will have on climate and the effects that will have on water quality over time when it is considering granting these permits. And
it's really hard not to touch your face in shock. Like they say with COVID, you're not supposed to touch your face, but this is just unbelievable.
It's wonky, but it's par for the course of what this administration has done for a while. And obviously, what really stands out to a lot of folks here is that, the Trump administration and Republicans generally came in and started to reverse all of the environmental rules that were set under the Obama administration, under the guise of restoring power to the states and adhering to federalist principles about what states are allowed to do. So if you, for example, are somebody like former Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, later the first EPA administrator for the Trump administration, you would say that the Clean Power Plan rule that the Obama administration put out was a violation of Oklahoma state's rights to pump as much carbon dioxide in the air as it wishes to from its coal plants. That logic does not apply to California, regulating the CO2 that comes out of vehicle tailpipes. That logic also does not apply to, New York, blocking a gas pipeline from.
So it's red states' rights is exactly what he wants, right? Red states' rights, yeah.
That is the interpretation that many people that look at this have, including many career EPA officials who, worked there under Democratic and Republican administrations.
What are the possible ramifications of a rule like this? Not that we can't imagine, but I would like to hear your thoughts.
I mean, it makes it easier for these projects to get pushed through. I think it's important to kind of understand what an involved process it is to actually permit a pipeline. A pipeline runs over many different bodies of water. And for each of those bodies of water, you have to carry out one of these certification processes under Section 401, where you are assessing what the environmental impact of that pipeline will be and what kinds of discharges will come of it in that body of water, and what the risk is. And as was the case in New York, this can take a long time. And what New York did was, it would take a while, and there was supposed to be a decision last year. And then the Cuomo administration said, you know what, we're denying this for now, but you can reapply. So, it sort of resets the clock back to the original 12-month deadline that the state had to make a decision on this. What this rule does is it says there's no resetting the clock. You decide in the first 12 months or not at all. And what that does, according to former EPA officials who, again, have worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations and have worked both on the state and the federal side of this, what that does is it creates an incentive for pipeline companies to perhaps withhold some information that would be relevant in the process for applying for these things in the first place.
It also creates a sort of a political hurdle, right? Because thinking about, we've been talking on the show about why Cuomo would say no to the pipeline in the first place. A lot of people think that, I think it was our conversation informing me here, but a lot of people think that Cuomo is trying to shine up his progressive creds, just in case there's an opportunity in 2024 for him to run for office because of his national spotlight here. So stopping a pipeline, environmentalists like that kind of thing. Also, I think you said something about the National Grid trying to strong arm him, and he doesn't take well to strong arming. So it seems like if there's a 12-month approval process and that's it would force politicians to take a stand within that 12 months instead of being able to kick the can down the road to the next politician who then may say yes or may say no. So, Cuomo wouldn't upset the oil and gas industry if he just kicked it down the road. He would have to just say, no, I'm taking a stand against oil and gas and say no in this 12-month period.
That's one interpretation of it, but it's also worth considering that, if there's an incentive for these companies to withhold information that may be relevant to assessing the safety of a project, and then, an administration that is concerned about the potential environmental impacts. Like, I would always stress that while Andrew Cuomo is a powerful wielder, similar to this one, and while that view of pipelines and of fossil fuels generally is one that I think many scientists and activists would share, it is certainly not policy. So
how does this affect activists? I know I was involved in the media section of the fight against the pipeline for years and years and years and years and years. Activists were just unfailingly, unceasingly, tirelessly working against this particular project. How would this affect activists and environmentalists' ability to fight against a new infrastructure?
Well, it reduces. Well, it's a complicated question, right? Because on the one hand, you could say that the fact that regulators had the kind of leeway to say no with the asterisk that a company could reapply, does perhaps amplify activists' power on one side, because they can make if they need to buy time to build up more pressure or apply more pressure to lawmakers, or if there is a pressure point that comes after the deadline for a decision on something like that, then perhaps it is to the benefit of activists that something could be kind of postponed for another day. And this rule change eliminates that ability. But the flip side of that is that perhaps you could get it all done in one fell swoop, and certainly it required an expenditure of resources on the part of the activists in New York who were fighting this pipeline to not only wage this fight last year, and ultimately get the initial denial last year, but then pick it back up again, and it asks a lot of the public that you are mobilizing to protest, or the media that you are mobilizing to cover these protests, to revisit things that appeared to be dead in the water, and then resurfaced in a way that perhaps the messaging initially did not anticipate. So I realize that's an unsatisfying answer, but I could see the way that this would be could be used by activists in a beneficial or a harmful way on either side of it, and it kind of, I think, depends on the campaign and a lot of other factors.
It certainly seems like this nefarious and evil plan, where red states get to do what they want and blue states have to have no choice in the matter. Um, is there evidence that this was worked up by one of those Koch brother think tanks that we've always hearing about? It doesn't seem like the Trump administration would even be smart enough to figure something like this out.
I mean, look, Andrew Wheeler, the administrator of the EPA, is a career DC guy. He was a lobbyist before taking this position, but he actually did serve in the EPA during the Bush administration, and and had also had various jobs working as an aide for high level senators and Congress people on the Republican side. So he knows his way around the halls of power, and he has a pretty good understanding of how to do these things. It certainly seems to be something that was implemented at the at the encouragement of the administration, although I'm sure that there was plenty of support from some of those powers that be. I will also just say, I wanted to note, as you were talking about the red state blue state divide here, that while yes, that is true for the leaders of those states, it is to the detriment of the citizens of those states. And if you look at the way that the amounts of pollution and the levels of cancer and associated diseases with certain types of discharges that are allowed in many of those red states that are much more flippant about allowing these things to happen, it's a great tragedy. And so, I always urge everyone to consider that, in those kinds of divides, that, we the people, we the citizens are, we suffer the same things regardless of the leadership of those states. I hope more voters in those states are mindful of the fact that that is the reason that they are exposed to those types of things.
We are speaking with Alexander Kaufman, climate reporter at the HuffPost. Hello to everyone watching in our Twitch chat and our Facebook stream. Hello, Thomasina. I want to say a special Thomasina hello. She's been following me since my WBAI days. So I just see that you're on here, and I definitely wanted to say hello. Alexander Kaufman, can you talk about what kind of power could individual states have in real transformative climate policy on their own? You wrote about the EPA's battle with California specifically, in the federal government threatened by its advancements on climate.
Yeah, I mean, that the states, and even more so on the city level, have really been the places where you've seen the most progress on climate policy, certainly over the past few years, especially. And there are a lot of things that can be done around this. I mean, there are these different, clean energy bills that have passed, obviously in California and New York and some other places, that mandate the percentage of the electricity that has to be generated by certain sources, by certain dates. States can direct funding to public investment in these sorts of things, although that's obviously in jeopardy right now with the kind of budget shortfalls that states are facing in the wake of their coronavirus responses. On perhaps one of the most exciting areas on the municipal level have been these bans on new gas hookups, mandating essentially that new buildings or apartments are required to have electric appliances. And that there are a lot of benefits to that, and that really the fight against the pipeline is always, yes, there are threats of this thing leaking and everything, but the bigger issue for a lot of climate people in particular is that if you build it, you will use it, and we should not be using these fuels 10 years, 20 years from now, and these things last quite a long time. So it's a waste. And I think that same type of mindset is probably much more applicable and personal when you think about it in terms of like gorgeous new apartment building that someone's going to move into, and of course all the appliances are going to be electric because that is the rule in this city. And so there are a lot of folks that are hoping New York City will get on board with that. There, Brookline in the Boston area did it. Berkeley in California did it.
What we need to do is make electric stoves very sexy and expensive so that people think that they're, like bougie,
Yeah,
because
like
people
the
somehow want to be
Tesla
bougie.
stoves.
Exactly. How can you talk about how the climate movement is working to fight this? Is this a done deal? Where are we?
The which
Oh,
the EPA change?
yeah. Or is that it?
Uh,
We're done. We're screwed.
it's the rule that's being set. I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, there are so many different regulatory changes that have been passed under the under the Trump administration that I think the primary way that the climate movement is hoping to fight this is by replacing who is in the White House next year. But I would say that this is not while yes, this is in effect now, that that there are still many ways in which states are able to slow things down and reconsider them, and that it is this may be a political victory for the administration and for the industry that it seeks to appease, but is not necessarily the start of a massive and unstoppable build out of this sort of infrastructure. But I would note that that massive build out and the likelihood of a larger build out certainly goes up, if the president gets a second term.
Oh. No. That's a good clip. We're going to clip that. Like, do you want to build up infrastructure? Destroy your place where you live?
I mean, it's worth noting too. I don't think Biden would be an absolute obstacle to any new fossil fuel infrastructure as well. So but would he be would he certainly be more considerate of the climate effects of things and
No, but
more
I
likely
think he'd
to
want to
enact
cover
climate
his ass.
regulations? Yes.
He'd want to cover his ass, right? So he'd be like, well, we did a whole bunch of studies and it's fine. He'd want to, don't you think?
I mean, I think anybody who
I mean,
is intellectually honest could not possibly say that Joe Biden and Donald Trump, even if they are not necessarily in the same place that Bernie Sanders reached on climate, are that Biden and Trump are by any means the same when it comes to this very specific and extremely urgent issue. So
have you seen any pushback from the states? Anything like a tossed aside comment by Cuomo, like, we're not going to let that happen? Have you seen any of the blue states that this is going to affect say anything?
Not that I've seen, but I think most people in the media and beyond have been very have had my attention pulled in many different directions over the past couple of weeks. So it's possible, although I have not seen it.
We'll keep an eye on it. Alexander, thanks for joining us on the program again. I'm thrilled that you're a regular here, and it is really important to keep our eye on everything, because this is, we have large protests happening in the streets, as everyone knows, and some of the things that cause underlying, tensions and injustices are climate issues. I'd love to have you speak to that for a minute or two, if you have a thought that you'd like to put out.
Sure. I would just note that, as we are seeing these protests unfold in the streets, and we are seeing a new debate unfurl over the merits of, some of the civil disobedience, be that vandalism or otherwise, that, it is worth noting that over the past couple of years, there have been droves of proposals from mostly Republican state lawmakers to restrict peaceful protests, particularly those that targeted pipelines and other fossil fuel infrastructure. A lot of this stuff cropped up after the Dakota Access fight in 2016. and has been, plowing ahead. As recently as last Friday, when Louisiana lawmakers passed an extension of their existing anti-pipeline protest bill, setting mandatory 3-year minimums in prison with hard labor for anybody who is protesting at a pipeline or critical infrastructure site in the midst of a state of emergency, like the one that we're experiencing now from COVID-19. So I think, as we try to understand these protests and try to understand the merits of some of the tactics that some protesters are using, that we should make note of the fact that peaceful protest is a right that is under attack in this country right now, and something that we need to think seriously about.
Alexander Kaufman, climate reporter. You can find him online at Alex C. Kaufman, Kaufman, and find his writing at HuffPost. Alexander, thank you. I hope in 2 weeks we're talking about the big victories that have settled in across the country. I don't know. I think we might have to keep
from your lips to God's ears.
Logging it out until November, hopefully. Oh my goodness. Thank you for making that point about, we need to get rid of Trump. I know you can't really do that as a reporter, but we can.
It's an objective factor when it comes to climate policy. So, take it or leave it, but
we'll take it. Thanks, Alexander. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.